All right, hello and welcome to the first episode of PJ Takes Five. This is a new sports show, just kind of running through some daily or weekly sports topics. Obviously, this is the first episode. I'm PJ. I should introduce myself. Just wanted to talk real quick about the format of what this is going to look like and kind of the why behind this. So for the goals, just because it's good to have goals in anything you do. If you go to work out, you don't have goals, you're not going to see as much progress as if you set out to say, like, hey, I'm going to hit this certain weight. So I think it's important to have goals. So the first goal is just to gain experience, both on camera, speaking to an audience, but also all the editing and researching and producing on the back end. So doing all of that by myself is going to be an interesting adventure here. And hopefully there is some improvement. I'm sure this first episode, even whenever I go back and edit it and publish it, is going to be pretty rough, but hopefully in a month or 2 months or whenever I look back at this, I can, really see that there's been improvement across the board. So just trying to get better, both in front of and behind the camera, and trying to find improvement episode to episode, and really just get comfortable doing all this stuff so that if I go to somebody, an employer, and say, hey, I know how to edit something, I know how to talk about something, I have actual stuff I can show them as proof. So without further ado, that's kind of the first topic. We're gonna kind of do 5 topics per episode here, mostly sports related, and then kind of a 6th bonus topic about some sort of media that I've consumed. So probably non-sports related, just because it's easy to kind of get lost in that and watch like sports movies or shows outside of watching a football game or a baseball game or a basketball game. So I'm trying to broaden our horizons a little bit and prove that, we know something besides just sports. So without further ado, we'll get into the first topic today. Just the MLB All-Star break is coming up here. We're a little past halfway through the season, so we're getting some real kind of results that we can look at, and see people start to kind of differentiate themselves from the crowd. As a Cubs fan, I do have to say that the Cubbies are currently leading Major League Baseball in point differential with a plus 126 runs scored, so that's pretty impressive. Obviously, the Dodgers are still kind of out in front of them in the NL, and they've had their number a little bit this season. But statistically speaking, they're kind of right on their heels. So hopefully they can make it up down the stretch here. There's kind of a group of 8 that both the Dodgers and Cubs find themselves in, alongside the Tigers, Astros, Phillies, Blue Jays, Mets, and Brewers as teams who have 50-plus wins. So those 8 are kind of in a pack of their own. And then in that group, you look at the NL East specifically, between the Mets and the Phillies is kind of the closest race right now. Obviously, it's the first week of July. No divisions are set or even close to being set, but looking at rosters and just kind of how it's all going to shake out, that's probably the closest race that's going to come down to it. So, jumping forward to next week, like I said, we have the All-Star break in Atlanta. Just kind of looking through the schedule. Starts out with the celebrity softball game on Saturday the 12th. Looked through that roster today. There's some interesting names, notably the baseball name, or kind of the only baseball name, CC Sabathia, of Yankees legend. He's out there. And then you got Drewski, who I'm sure many are familiar with. ESPN's L. Duncan and John Boy's Jake Storyatali are kind of the 2 media personalities. And then other non-baseball athletes, we got Olympic gymnast Jordan Childs, and then former receiver Terrell Owens, who I'm sure many are familiar with and are excited to see him on the diamond there. So then the next day from that is when the MLB draft happens. I know there's been a lot of news with that, especially around the Nationals, who hold the first overall pick. They just fired their manager, Dave Martinez, and the GM, Mike Rizzo, right before, picking first overall. It kind of makes sense just from the standpoint of, if you thought they were going to fire them anyways, why would you let them draft and then fire them at the end of the year? So I don't hate the idea, but it kind of seems like they were, the management was between a rock and a hard place, and they were kind of doing everything they could and just kind of got the plug pulled here. So that first pick will be kind of the start maybe not the start of a new regime, but an enticing piece for whoever does come in. And I know it's a lot different than like the NFL or even NBA draft when it comes to the MLB draft, but it looks like the two big options for the first overall pick will be LSU left-hand pitcher Cade Anderson, who obviously was just part of the College World Series team for LSU. He was named the most outstanding player, and he had that shutout complete game in the first game against Coastal Carolina in the finals. And then the other candidate would be infielder Ethan Holiday, who's a high school prospect, but he's the younger brother of Jackson Holiday, who was the first overall pick just a few years ago in 2022, and then of course the son of 7-time All-Star and World Series champ Matt Holiday. So, just kind of deciding which way we want to go. The infielder, bat, that's kind of like the legacy pick, and for good reason, or the ace pitcher who you hope can really turn into a dependable arm for you. So that's Sunday the 13th. And then trickles into Monday the 14th. And then Monday evening is also the Home Run Derby. So as of recording this right now on Monday night, we only have 4 people listed for the Home Run Derby. And those are Ronald Acuna Jr., Cal Raleigh, James Wood, and Byron Buxton. So obviously we're going to get more names to that. Some ones that you'd expect maybe are Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Kyle Schwarber, Seiya Suzuki, and Eugenio Suarez, who are the only players with 25 plus homers, not currently in the Derby. But not all those guys are currently All-Stars, which we'll get to in a second here. So obviously more names are going to get added to that, and there'll be a lot of interest surrounding that. And then finally for the week, the All-Star game is on Tuesday. Rosters haven't announced, and whenever those rosters get announced, the first kind of thing is always like, who are the snubs? So as a Cubs fan, like I said, the big one for us was Seiya Suzuki, who currently leads MLB in RBIs. And, it's not insane to like have a guy who leads in a major stat not be named an All-Star, especially somebody who's not a position player. But the Cubs are a very good team right now, and Seiya's definitely been a big part of that. So as the injuries kind of come out, you would expect him to maybe get a nod there. And then the other Cub that a lot of people kind of say as a snub was Michael Busch at first base. That one's just a little tricky because I think he had 4 homers against the Cards this past weekend, so that's obviously a hair late to really get involved in like the fan voting side of it all. So I don't know. It's not like a crazy slight. Definitely as much as Seiya. Kind of just poor timing from Busch to get hot there over the long weekend, the holiday weekend. And then another big snub was Juan Soto, who obviously had a pretty slow start, especially for his standards to the start of the season. But he's kind of back in his regular form with the Mets there. His .396 on base percentage is the 4th best in the majors, and he's one of only 11 players with over 20 homers. So, offensively, he's definitely doing his part, and especially at outfield where he can kind of fit guys in, it'd make a lot of sense for him to get in there. The big thing that I think there's been a lot of talk about with the All-Star break, and rightfully so, is just kind of the rule about every team gets a guy. One, there's just so many spots. There's like 60 plus spots. And then you get guys who maybe aren't quite as deserving, and it's kind of pushing out guys from like the Dodgers, the Cubs, the Mets, teams that are like pretty good and could really have a lot of people in there. But I don't know. Asking baseball to change something like that is probably not going to happen relatively soon. So for anybody who's a fan of somebody who got slighted or snubbed, you're just going to have to hope that for one reason or another, somebody backs out and then your guy gets in. So we'll see what happens there. Moving down the rundown here. NBA trade news. So this morning, Monday morning, a decently sized 3-team trade was announced that sent John Collins to the Clippers, Norman Powell to the Heat, and then Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson and a future second to Utah. That was reported by Shams Charania. So obviously, there's three parts to this. Starting with the John Collins part, it's an interesting fit for sure. I remember when he was in Atlanta, and it always just kind of felt like, okay, this is the John Collins, breakout season. It just never really happened. But as loudly as you can have a performance in Utah, he was actually pretty solid last year. His second year in Utah, he had 19 points per game. That's his highest since like his second year with Atlanta. He had some injury issues in his back and ankle that kept him to about 40 games, which is about the lowest in his career so far. But I still think he's a really interesting piece with the Clippers. He can play small ball center if you want to take Zubac out, or when you have Zub in or Brook Lopez, who they signed, he can kind of slide onto the four and be a pretty good spacer for you, and just be an athletic player. So I think it's a good sign that they're kind of getting involved in the double big lineups, which seem to be kind of back after the whole kind of shooting and Golden State kind of philosophy took over there for a couple of years of like super small ball and one center, five out, where now teams are a little more dedicated to having a traditional five, having a traditional power forward. And you kind of saw that deep in the playoffs, obviously OKC with Chet and Hartenstein, and then Indy with Pascal and Miles Turner. And, even teams like Milwaukee, Denver, the Timberwolves, running out 2-3 bigs and being able to have different kind of skill sets on the court at one time. As these big guys get better and better at shooting, it makes sense that their kind of size will be more coveted again. So I kind of liked it for the Clippers. For the Heat, getting back Norman Powell, that's a really interesting player as well, who had a big season last year, kind of in the wake of Paul George leaving. Last season, his third with LA, his first as a starter since being in Portland, where he was also a starter. Started all 60 games that he was available for, averaged about 22 points, and then about 7.5 baskets out of 16 attempts per game, which were all career highs. So, really stepped up as a scorer where the Clippers needed him to. But now in Miami, I think he's a really good complementary piece to a backcourt that already has Tyler Hero and Davion Mitchell. Hero, obviously, kind of like the more ball-dominant creator, but creates his own shots guy. And then Davion, more of the, we'll put you on the opponent's point guard and not worry about it. You'll get your shots up and everything, but big energy, big defense player. So I think Powell fits right in there. If you want to go super small and kind of move him to the 3 and have those other two guards at the 1 and 2, I think he can do that. But obviously, with the Wiggins contract that they got back from the Jimmy Butler trade, Miami is definitely kind of in a transitory phase right now, so it wouldn't be super shocking to see them go out and try to get another big name with that contract or some others. To kind of match up with Bam, who, is obviously one of the better bigs in the NBA, but kind of playing without like a lead guard. No disrespect to Tyler Hero, but a guy of Bam's ability should be kind of like a reliable pick and roll, pick and pop player. And they don't really have that from the guard position. So we'll see if they try to bunch in those contracts together and go after somebody, maybe a De'Aaron Fox if San Antonio has Harper and Stephen Castle, and they're just like, we're fine with this. So we'll see what happens with them. And the last piece, Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson to the Utah. Most likely just going to be buyout candidates. Utah already has the most cap space, and they could definitely look to add to that. They're definitely playing the tank game for some players next year, and I know they kind of disappointed with landing like the 5th overall pick after really selling out for the tank this year. So we'll see what happens, but yeah, I would expect Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson to get bought out for sure. Other NBA news, Kyle Lowry had a 1-year re-signing with the 76ers, so I think that's his 3rd year up there. And then Paolo Banchero got his big rookie extension, 5 years, up to $287 million. Obviously, that's like an agent reported number, so probably not going to end up being quite that high, but still it keeps Paolo, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs all together for the next 5 years. And then obviously they just acquired Desmond Bain, so that kind of foursome there is kind of like their centerless core, and that's a really good group. I mean, obviously, with all the injuries that are out east right now, I think a lot of Eastern teams, including the Heat, we just talked about, are kind of looking at this year as like a why not us, and Orlando's definitely got a really good case. And then last NBA nugget here, kind of just monitoring these Achilles injuries between Halliburton, Tatum, and Lillard. Obviously, Lillard's a little different because he's the only one not on roster right now after getting waived and stretched and everything there in Milwaukee. So the Pacers president, Kevin Pritchard, came out today and basically said that Halliburton will not play next year, which I think everyone kind of figured. He mentioned that, knowing what he knows now and how everything shook out, he probably would have not have had Halliburton play. And they probably going to lose that game, but at least Halliburton can recover from his calf strain and be healthy. That's such a tough thing to say now, because obviously, like, if you lose that game with Halliburton on the bench and street closed, you're probably like, it could have been different. We just kind of pushed him. So obviously, it's just the hindsight game of it's really easy to say what you would have done after knowing everything that happened. But yeah, it looks like he won't be playing at all next year. And then Tatum's still a little up in the air. Obviously, his injury was about a month-ish earlier, so he's got a little more time, and he had a little more time to start with the rehab. But I know he posted a video of him like walking in a pool that got a lot of people excited, but he's probably still a decent bit away, and just a star player in their like mid to young 20s. I don't know if you'd be really rushing to get them back. I think for both Halliburton and Tatum, their championship window, quote unquote, is kind of like as long as they're on the roster. So I'd focus on just getting them back healthy, even if that means not seeing them for the 2025-2026 season. But we'll see. Obviously, these guys are uber competitive and want to get on the court as soon as possible. So next topic up is the WNBA All-Star break, which is happening here next week, the All-Star game on the 19th of July. So we've known for a little bit that Caitlin Clark of the Fever and Nafisa Collier of the Lynx are going to be the captains. Collier she's the league's leading scorer with about 24 points per game, so that makes a lot of sense. And then Clark was also named the captain after earning the most public votes. So kind of always like the drama with her in the league there. And then they're going to go back and forth and draft the teams. So their pool of starters is Paige Buchers, who is a rookie, so that's kind of notable of like first overall pick, already an All-Star. And then Sabrina Ionescu, Brianna Stewart, Aja Wilson, Alicia Gray. And then some notable reserve players named today. Kelsey Mitchell, Kelsey Plum, Alyssa Thomas, and Angel Reese were all named reserve players. So, Reese is kind of in the news again here for criticizing refs recently. This guy had a 5-point loss to the Minnesota Lynx, who are like the league's best team right now. And in that 5-point loss, the Lynx shot 9 more free throws. So Reese was pretty vocal after the game, just saying like to the refs, man, I wish we could get more shots. At the line, call a fair game here. I'm tired of this blank. And so that's always going to get some attention amongst sports fans, but I think it's really important to remember that she's not the only person kind of being outspoken like this. I know the Fever's coach, Stephanie White, within the past month was also pretty vocal, and then Kelsey Plum has also been pretty critical of the refs recently. So, just kind of as we head into the break, that's always kind of a moment for these teams and players to kind of take a second and step back and cool out. So just from like the Angel Reese side of it, you kind of hope that she gets that break, the very deserving break of being an All-Star, and just, not having to deal with like the media circus. And then just from like the officiating side, obviously WNBA is not like the youngest league, but compared to other sports, they're pretty young still, and the officiating stuff will improve as like more eyes are on it. But look at any sport, no one's happy with the refs. I know the NBA fans are always pretty aggressive against the referees, so I'm sympathetic to the frustration for sure. But I think for the Sky side of it, you just have to know like it's a pretty isolated event, and it's probably not an indication of anything long term. So, like I said, that deserving break is coming up for all these players who were named All-Stars in Indiana. I'm pretty sure. So I'm sure that they are well represented with 3 players, and then it's going to be a big weekend. As they can kind of continue to grow their brand after just announcing expansion teams in Cleveland, Philadelphia, and Detroit. So they just kind of keep growing, and their stars keep growing, which is awesome. And then kind of last sports topic here. This isn't particularly like super new news, but just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was really interesting. Just all that's happened with the Steelers and the Dolphins trade. Training camps are at the end of this month, so a couple weeks away. And obviously teams are kind of putting like the final touches on their rosters for now. Obviously, once people get cut and stuff, there'll probably be some signings. But this was a really interesting trade. Obviously, it kind of came in as like the Jalen Ramsey for Minkah Fitzpatrick part of it, and then Johnny Smith was tacked on to the Steelers later, but kind of looking at on one as like Ramsey and Smith for Minkah, and then Miami subsequently signing Darren Waller out of retirement. The Miami side is interesting because they're kind of leaning further into the identity of being like a real speed finesse team. And if you're a Miami fan, the identity is speed and finesse, but I think other people kind of view it as like a fragility thing. And no matter which way you look at it, I think Darren Waller kind of like adds to that. Obviously, last time we saw him, super talented, fast player, really, 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 really good story about overcoming addictions and stuff. If you haven't seen that, I would look into that, but. Does he make Miami a tougher team? Probably not. Does he make them a more explosive team? Potentially. But I think all the problems you had with just like late season games, is this a team that can play in cold weather? Is this a team that can go on the road and kind of give someone the business? I don't know if they've answered any of those questions. So to me, it kind of feels like if the Dolphins do want to make a deep run, they probably have to try to win that division and have people coming into Miami in the postseason, which, the Bills are obviously kind of a wagon right now. And then, like, the Patriots, you kind of expect to be a little better. Even the Jets, I don't know if they're a playoff team, but I don't think they're, like, a rollover team right now. So we'll see. And then, obviously, Minkah coming back. I think there was some not great play last season, but overall I think Minkah is like one of the better kind of Alabama DBs to come out of that Saban era. So is he like an all-pro, first team all-pro player in the back end? Maybe not anymore, but I still think he's like a super reliable free safety, and then you can kind of bring him down the corner, put him in the slot, do a bunch of different stuff with him. So I think he'll be really good and kind of a leader on that defense who's kind of hungry for somebody like that. I know they have Bradley Chubb, who's kind of a vet like that, but he's kind of fighting for like his own spot, not on the team, but just kind of in that defense alongside Jalen Phillips. So yeah, I think adding Minkah is good. And then from the Steelers side, just kind of the latest like older vet that they've added with Ramsey, obviously with Aaron. And then Darius Slay. Darius Slay is going to be like one of the corners. And I see this argument out there that they don't have any good free safety right now because it's Joy Porter Jr., Darius Slay, and now Jalen Ramsey at corner. And you have like Deshaun Elliott and Miles Killebrew kind of at safeties, although Killebrew might be more of like a situational or special teams player. But I look at a player like Ramsey, who's such a vet and still like pretty athletic, and I think, is he a candidate to play some free safety? Maybe not, every snap for 17 games free safety, but could he be that kind of star rover defensive back who's kind of just trying to read the quarterback on 3rd and 8 obvious passing situations, just trying to jump something? It kind of screams like a Derwin James-ish role to me a little bit, of just somebody who's kind of allowed to freelance a little bit whenever they feel like it. So that could be something interesting. Obviously, with Tomlin back there, I think you get a vet with as much respect as Ramsey in there, and there's like a mutual kind of like, we don't need to say what we need to say. Like, I know and I know and so I think he's gonna be pretty good for that defense. Who's obviously maybe on the brink of losing TJ Watt. I know there's reports about him out there. I don't think he'll get dealt before the deadline, or before the season starts here. But you got TJ, you've got Cam Hayward, and now you got Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay, kind of, the veteran leaders on what is like a relatively younger team, outside of like I said, Rodgers and even DK Metcalf is on a second contract now. So yeah, Steelers, big move for them. We'll see if that kind of gets them back into that level of like Ravens and a Bengals team if their defense isn't terrible. So that's our last sports topic. So like I said, I want to try to finish all these episodes off with some sort of non-sports related media that I've consumed recently. So I think that can be like a show, a movie, a song, video game, a book, literally anything that's not super sports related, and hopefully something that's not super like in the news or like happening at the moment. So like I probably wouldn't talk about like the new Jurassic Park movie, just because you kind of figure a lot of people are talking about that and seeing that. So this one's kind of like not in that category, just I'm sure a lot of people saw this past weekend, but for the second 4th of July in a row, I watched Independence Day. Like I said, very, very big movie. So I'm not, saying any of this as if somebody's going to hear this and say, oh, I'd never heard of Independence Day. I looked it up, and besides Jurassic Park, when this came out in 1996, it was the second highest grossing box office ever. So obviously very popular movie. I'm sure a bunch of people have heard about it. But yeah, I watched that 4th of July. Really fun movie. Big ensemble cast kind of movie of the summer kind of deal. I looked at it as like Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum, Bill Pullman, and Randy Quaid are kind of like the four, not horsemen of the apocalypse, but the kind of pillars we're kind of cycling throughout the movie. And they've all got their different kind of like quirks and characteristics, right? That I think the casting kind of leads into in a very natural way. My biggest takeaways, first, for being like, probably the main character of the movie, they really take a long time to introduce Will Smith. It's probably about like 20 minutes into the movie, which is pretty funny. I was just kind of waiting for like, I know Will Smith's in this movie, but I don't know where he is. And then he comes in a little late. So there's that. I thought it was interesting. Like I said, Jurassic Park, just a few years before that, is like one of the other highest grossing movies. Obviously, the Jeff Goldblum carryover there, but they kind of stole the line when he's like, must go faster. When they're like in the airplane, like trying to escape the bigger, alien spaceship. He says that, but it's also the line he says when he's in the back of the Jeep as like the T-Rex is taking after them. So I thought that was funny that not so much as an illusion as much as just straight up like saying the exact same line. That was interesting. And then like at the end there with Randy Quaid, the hello boys, I'm back. That's a great line. But it is really weird in that scene where he basically just like dies, sacrifices himself, and then all the guys in the control room are like cheering. but then they just like pan to his oldest kid who's there for some reason, and he's like, you know, sad because his dad just died, obviously. And then Adam Baldwin, who's one of the like guard, you know, military guards there, has to kind of walk up to him and like, you know, straighten up and be like, oh, I'm so sorry about your loss, but kind of some like weird little like moments, which is kind of to be expected of a sci-fi movie like that. You know, maybe the guys writing it aren't the most like in touch with something like that, but yeah, overall, I thought just like a really fun movie. Definitely a good 4th of July film. So as you can see here, we've worked through all of our topics. Just moved one there a little bit. Worked through all of our topics. So that's about it. That's kind of how it's gonna look. Hopefully, next time I do this, I'm hoping that this one comes out tomorrow on Tuesday, and I can get another one up for Friday, and kind of stick to that like Tuesday Friday schedule, as I can. Obviously, I got other things going on, so it might not always happen at the exact same time, but that's kind of my plan for now. Just hope that, like I said at the beginning, hope that every episode there's something improving from like the, you know, the side of like people watching, but from my side of like feeling how I was able to produce it, I hope there's improvement there. You know, realizing, oh, I can do this, you know, effect, or I can do this kind of like search engine thing when I'm doing it, as my thing falls off here. That's about it. Really, it's just trying to get me a little more comfortable, you know, talking to a mic. I'm gonna put this down. Talking to a mic and doing the show. So, thanks so much if you listened, and hopefully I'll see you Friday. Peace.